It is No Gifts, Please, the parenting podcast by the pair with no real gifts, but a whole lot of gumption. Hey everyone, I'm Steve Noviello.
And I'm Jenny Anchondo.
So we've been kind of teasing this episode for a while now.
Yeah.
I think that even before the new year, we were talking about anxiety in kids and all of that stuff. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, yeah, because us treating our own kids hasn't been working. Like us just randomly doling out advice has been unsuccessful. So we thought we should, bring in an expert.
Well, and listen, and honestly, we're not even going to have too much chit chat off the top here because I want to make sure we give as much time as we possibly can. This anxiety in children is an issue that I keep on hearing about.
Yes.
And quite frankly, I feel like we're experiencing with at least one of our kids. The other one doesn't seem to have a care in the world, but we'll see.
But TBD.
TBD.
Because he's little.
TBD.
So we brought in a couple of experts that we had heard great reviews on both of these women. We have Dr. Ahu Vaziri-Line, who's the co-founder of Thread Counseling Group in Dallas. She's an author, a speaker, a former graduate professor, licensed professional counselor supervisor. Also, I thought it was interesting that she's a registered play therapist. I could go on and on with her qualifications, but then we also have Christina McCook, who is also the co-founder of Thread Counseling Group in Dallas, and then also that licensed professional counselor and registered play therapist, has a variety of different experiences that are so perfectly aligned with our audience. So we thought, what the heck? Let's bring them in and hit them with all the hard questions, right?
And honestly, first of all, thank you both for coming in. And I really want to start very generally and ask kind of the question that I think is on everybody's mind, which is, what the heck is going on here? I mean, all of a sudden, it's like, I know everyone's reading The Anxious Generation and everyone's using the buzzword, but what is causing this? Because it seems that everybody's kid is dealing with some sort of anxiety.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things. So I practiced prior to COVID, practiced prior to being a mom, and then I practiced after COVID. So it's been really interesting. I think most of us as counselors in the field saw a huge uptick in clients, especially teens, little kids coming in with things like anxiety during COVID. But now in this post-COVID era, we are seeing so many anxious kids. And I think there's a million different reasons for it. One of the big things that we think about is everything is so public, right? Our kids already feel like they're kind of under a microscope. Our parents feel like parenting is more public than ever, right? So
true.
Everything feels like every move I make, everybody's watching, right? So we're seeing so much social anxiety in kids where they feel like they cannot make a wrong move without everybody judging them. So it kind of feels like it just hinders them. We're also seeing the fact that so many kids, if you think about those 2-3 years of COVID and how it impacted every age differently, there's not a good age to have gone through COVID, right?
Sure, of
Think
course.
about it. It was hard for 20-somethings trying to graduate college and go out into the field. But then when I think about little kids, we had parents who were sitting at home, our younger kids, right? You have parents sitting at home who are doing the best they can with what they have. They are trying to parent their children while also teaching them. And every parent had kind of different rules of what COVID looked like in their house. And so kids are trying to navigate that. But all the social skills and skills that they would have learned in school during that time was almost ripped away from them. And then they're thrust back into school and they're like, everything's normal. Go back to things as they were. And they're trying to make sense of it, right? But if you think about a 4-year-old who spent 3 years of their life in COVID, that's 3/4 of their life. So they're trying to make sense of it. And so that's a lot of, I think, what I'm seeing. I don't know, Christina, what are your thoughts?
I was going to add on that. When even when we were coming out of COVID, and people are starting to kind of go back into life and go to Target, not once a month, and just trying to be able to engage on a more normal level. Yeah. There was probably a lot of don't forget your hand sanitizer, and don't touch that, and do we need to wipe down our groceries afterwards? Those, even just post-COVID, those implications, those little kids, those 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, they are sitting there observing all of that and taking that in. And that's that's not what I experienced as a 2, 3, and 4-year-old. It's not what my kids experienced. They were older. But the implications of that, that's their foundation of what is normal and expected. And so to then take away and say, oh, well, not that you don't have to worry about germs. Yes, you should wash your hands and yada, yada. But to then take that away and say, oh, no, it's fine. It's such a confusing message for them to not know, well, which is which? What is the real what's reality.
Right. Whereas like when I was a kid in the 70s, like food fell on the floor and then you ate it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
You
like
brushed it off.
when you brushed it off.
Even for 10 seconds later.
So, but like, so for the parents though that are tuning in and saying, okay, so and I'll use my own kids as an example. So I have a 7-year-old. And it's funny that you mentioned COVID because I was like, oh, thank God that these kids didn't go to kindergarten until after COVID, right? I was like, we kind of skirted it. Yes, during pre-K and like daycare, there was the whole mask thing and, you know, all that other kind of stuff. But like, I don't. So it's interesting that, to your point, watching us as parents behave anxiously really translated. But one of the things that you mentioned was like living kind of this very public life. So I think that some of our viewers are going to say, or listeners are going to say, okay, but are they really that aware? And if they are, what can I do as a parent to kind of mitigate how exposed, for lack of a better term, my child feels?
Yeah. I think of a lot of things, right? So I say this, like, parenting is more public than ever, because if you think about, like, okay, it was just Christmas, right? Think about your feed.
Yeah.
Like all of the perfect cookies and all of the perfect gifts, and put together this beautiful holiday picture, and your kids are a part of that, and they're seeing that. You know, they're seeing like, okay, we have to
it's important to be perfect.
It's important to be perfect. It's important to have it all together. Like, I need to go to school and show everybody what a perfect Christmas we had. And so to me, I almost feel like a lot of that comes from, and I'm a parent of a 3-year-old. And so of course I feel that. I'm like, oh my God, Margot, put on your dress. Like, look cute.
Leave the bow on.
Leave the bow on. Come on, you look crazy. Your hair's everywhere. And so I know that I feel that way. And so I am certain that some of the messages I'm even sending will go to her, right? This idea that I want to demonstrate this like level of perfection. And even I think the best of us with the best intentions are still unintentionally kind of passing that on to our kids, that same worry.
Well, we're screwed. I mean, if you as a professional
I make many mistakes.
No hope for the rest of us. No. I mean, what you're saying essentially is that it's actually us passing down our own anxiety to our children.
Or our own perfectionism. Okay, so there's this sort of nature then that I think, and we had this too growing up, like the comparison from child to child. And it sounds like it's heightened now. Yeah. We're at fault, like the grown-ups are at fault for the heightened nature of it, but it does exist. So let's say a child's comparing to, you know, I can only do addition, but he can do multiplication. How do we navigate that comparison academically in the classroom?
One of the first things you need to do is tease out to see if there's any learning differences. To make sure, I mean, we see a lot of kids with anxiety connected to academics. And sometimes there's a learning difference at play, and remediating that is so essential in building a kid's confidence. I mean, school is their job, right? They're going to school. Like, we go to jobs, like we have jobs, and we go and, gosh, I want to be good at my job. Like, I want to feel like I'm capable. So if I'm going to school every day and I am struggling every day, and I'm looking over to my peers around me and I'm like, wait a minute, they're doing this, they're getting it, and it's going faster for them, but I still don't understand. That's a direct hit to my self-esteem and my like sense of capability. So I think just making sure that there isn't a learning difference at play. I mean, talking to kids about what their strengths are, normalizing challenges. I mean, we were talking earlier today, Ahu and I were talking about, well, what are the things that are really important in developing a child's ability to navigate through challenges, whether it is an academic challenge or it's a social challenge. And I think especially for our for kids, for the younger clientele, developing their like language, emotional IQ, building awareness around like labeling their feelings. I mean, it's their first experience. Like, they have all the feelings. Tiny little kids, 3, 2, 1-year-olds, they have all the same feelings we do. Like, they experience all these feelings, but they don't have the verbal capacity to be able to express them. So starting to develop that verbal capacity for kids as early as possible. And that does start with like leading by example and saying like, I'm feeling anxious. We were talking about like, oh, are we passing some of this down to our kids? Well, if I'm feeling anxious about something, I can say, oh gosh, I feel kind of nervous. Guess what? I'm not on a podcast every day. Was I nervous before I came here? Yes. I mean, it's part of the normal human experience. So I can be like, yeah, I was really, really nervous. I felt kind of uncomfortable. I did it. I got through it. And actually, I really liked it, right? Yeah. So you can showing your kids how you navigate through challenges and sharing a little bit of your emotional experience, not having to do things perfectly, being like, oh, I screwed up. I had a pitch at work and it didn't go very well and didn't get picked. So I was kind of bummed. Like, That's a
That's
good.
good.
That's
Yeah.
a developmentally, like for a younger kid, like a 5, 6, 7-year-old can hear like, oh yeah, you were bummed. You tried really hard at something and it didn't go as well. Well, how does that translate to them at school? Well, they might connect that to, oh, well, I'm trying at math, but math just isn't clicking in the same way. And you might be on the back end as a parent teasing out, is this a learning difference, or do they need to sit closer to the teacher? What's going on? But you're also then kind of normalizing that a little bit for them.
But that's nice. That works for sports too. That works
Sure.
for whatever activities the kids are in, whether it's chess club or dance or soccer or whatever.
Well, and the thing that I like about that example as well is that it presents modern day me or current day me with those struggles, as opposed to telling my child a story
Yes.
about, well, when I was a kid, and they're like, I don't know you as a kid. Like I will say to our kids sometimes, if I know that in fact, sometimes I'll even make it up, right? Like gosh, like I wasn't picked for something today at work, and it really made me sad. I felt really left out. Like everybody else got to do something and I really want to do, and I didn't, knowing full well that I'm thinking you have anxiety about having a similar experience at school this week, or whatever the case is. And you're right, it really does kind of open up a human, dialogue, with them. So the anxious part here. So we were talking about, Jenny and I were talking about this on a recent episode. So, selfishly, we're going to take some time for our own children.
This is
So
our
here we
session.
go.
Everyone's
Here we
listening
go.
in. No.
So we have a 7-year-old, super academic, very first child, like super type A, like this is very pragmatic, like this, everything, and we were at the arcade recently, and we have a younger son who is like, thinks he can fly, thinks he has a tail, like doesn't like, and like is so cool in that respect, as cool as our other kid is cool in like a very academic, respect. So we go to the arcade, and the little guy is like running around doing a zillion different things and having the time of his life. And our older son is like calculating, like how many tickets can I win? And like at the end of this, and unfortunately the things that promise you the most tickets are also the hardest to win. Right. So he is motivated to play all of these like truly awful, like it's ripping out my soul because I know that you're not going to win. Right. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, but I know at the end of the day, and the little guy had like 8 tickets and was thrilled, and our older son had like 2,500 and, I was like, let's just like, I find myself wanting to be like, let's just have fun. Like, don't worry so much about the outcome. And then I think to myself, like, you're 7 and this is so deeply who you are already. And then I think, what did I do?
What did I do to make this happen?
Which is probably the fact that I'm even having that thought is probably exactly what the cause is. Do you get what
Yes.
please tell me I'm not nuts.
You're
right?
not nuts. I feel like we hear this all the time. Also guilty.
Yeah.
But I think I say this to parents all the time. I work a lot with parents who may have like very high achieving children. And I think about high achieving children, especially ones that the one you described, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Always behaves in class, always the first to like raise their hand. Like my daughter went to dance class and was like trying to help the dance teacher and like nodding, like sit down,
Love.
You're just fine. But what happens with those kids, even like, of course we go straight to like blame and what did I do? And did I instill this in you? But it's kind of like, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You do really well in school and guess what? You get praised for doing really well in school. And when you're the kid who follows all the rules, well, guess what? The teacher says, why can't you guys be more like so-and-so? And they get all of this like admiration for being this child who's really good at school, really well behaved. And so what happens for those kids is it does become so deeply rooted in who they are, and it becomes this huge part of their identity, which is hard because then they feel like this is who I am. I can't step outside of that, right? Can't make mistakes.
It's a huge burden for them to bear.
Massive.
But I think that the question though, like, and you're right, like we had a situation with him where like he's in an advanced math class, right? He's in 2nd grade and he's in tag math. And the teacher's like, this kid is like, he absolutely belongs here, and he's, doing 5th grade math or whatever. One day he forgot his homework and was so crippled by the idea that he was unprepared for class. And she wrote me a letter and was like, is he okay? Like he was, and I was like, you know what? I'll bet you it's because he didn't have his homework. And the idea of not being prepared was just otherworldly to him. So there's kind of 2 questions here. One is, if you truly get joy from being motivated by the calculation of getting the most tickets at the arcade, who am I to take that away from you or tell you that it's wrong? And then the second part is, and I am like this as well, in some aspects of my life, being very buttoned up and very detail oriented and having all of the things figured out results in some pretty amazing accomplishments. So how do I make sure the volume is the right setting on those things? And we'll start with the first part of like, if your joy is truly calculating the coupons, do I interfere?
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Well, we can go. So I think like if we're going to use the tickets, like the 2,500, he's the big winner, all that stuff, as the example, I might go in and kind of say like, hey, okay, so bud, you're trying like the hardest game.
Yeah.
You're trying the games that like most people aren't going to get, like maybe 1%. 1 out of every 100 people might get this. So yeah, you should go for it. But we should also think like, well, you know what? You might not get it. Like, so some of it might be setting expectations. And then when the disappointment happens, it sounds like he was a big winner. And so, great job, right? But there's also going to be the flip side of there are going to be times when he tries really, really hard and he isn't successful and it doesn't play out the way he wants it to. Might just, this is probably one of our favorite, most important, I think it's like the most important parenting strategy is just reflecting the feeling back. Because you can't solve that for him. You can't fix it. You can just say, oh, you're really bummed. Yeah. You're really disappointed. Because as parents, we often try to solve it and fix it. Well, like next time, or have you tried this strategy? Or maybe if you did this game more, you might get more. Instead of trying to solve, it would just be, you're really, really bummed. You're really disappointed. That was hard. Yeah. And then be quiet and let him kind of process through that. And sometimes they're going to talk more after that. But also they're starting to internal like, okay, so that was hard and it didn't go the way I wanted. That's okay. Down the road, they're going to start problem solving some things on their own. The next time he goes, he might try a mix of different games, maybe try some of the really hard ones, some of the easier ones, just so he has a little bit more of a guarantee. But he's starting to build his own ability to navigate through challenges because disappointment is, you can't protect him from that. Like they're going to be disappointed. So if he forgot his homework and he's devastated and even his teacher checked on him, I might come back later in the day. Maybe, I feel like my kids are, they're older now. But when they were younger, I feel like bedtime was such a nice kind of calm time once they got them in bed, right?
Right, yeah.
Of course. That's when it all comes out.
Where you can kind of come back and be like, hey, so it was really hard today. You forgot it and you worked so hard and school's really important for you. That was really hard. And then you say nothing.
That's
and
the hard part.
It's so hard.
Say nothing.
Yes.
Say nothing is the hardest part of what you just said.
Yeah.
But that allows them you're validating his experience and you feel heard and understood. And there's so much value in that because you can't fix it for him. He's probably going to start figuring out how to not forget his homework, but he's still going to make mistakes and forget it sometimes.
Is it even harder for a kid who has a younger sibling who is the total opposite, who gets just as much? Like I was telling my sister about this and she was like, you get that was us, right? Like I was the older perfect kid and you were insane and people were like highly entertained by you. Like you moved to London and like the night before we're figuring out where you were going to live. Like she's like, it's just otherworldly to her, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so interesting because siblings are going to compare themselves to each other too. And what you see, I think for me, is there's this idea of like, this is my role. This is my label. I'm, kind of like what I was just saying, like I'm the perfect one. I have to keep it all together. And so to me, I think that strategy that Christina was sharing, it almost gives kids like permission, right? Of that was really disappointing. And you not trying to fix it, I think shows them that like it's okay that you fail, right? It's okay. You are failing and we're talking about it. And now this can also be part of your identity too, And I think it helps because then I'm the younger sibling. And so I was the mess up.
Me
and
too.
So for me, because what also happens is when there's like the older that's perfect, the younger one's like, all right, well, I guess here I am.
Right,
like,
exactly.
Because I'm the personality hire. And so, you kind of fit into that role too. But I almost feel like it gives both siblings that permission to say like, oh, well, this person messes up. And maybe there's times when I can get it right too. And we're not stuck in our silos of like, who we are. Like there's not those labels that are so permanent on
He
us.
constantly corrects his younger brother. Constantly.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hudson, I feel like Hudson's up to the task.
He can take
like,
it.
He can take it. He's like, it's fine. I'm great.
Okay. I'm actually perfect. Thanks.
So one of the big things when I was sort of polling some various friend groups that, okay, they're coming in. What do you want to talk about? And there was a common thread with kids maturing at different ages within a grade level. So like first, second, third grade, there's a big difference. Like there's some kids that are still listening to Kids Bop. There's kids that are doing Taylor Swift. There's people, there's girls that are interested in makeup. There's girls that are still watching like Disney Plus. So for the kids who are maybe not as mature naturally, how do they navigate feeling maybe like a little weird or a little like they're still playing pretend, for example, whereas the other girls are talking about makeup? How would you navigate that if a parent feels like I'm the mom or dad of like the kids who's starting to feel kind of left out?
Socially left out.
Yeah.
The social development, I mean, you can't even guess what your child's classroom is going to look like. I mean, in kindergarten, you can have a 6-year-old and an almost 8-year-old. I mean, and that developmentally is such a wide range. There's so much that happens that it's nearly impossible to try to say, oh, well, they're going to be able to now, like, here's going to their little friend group, and it's going to morph and change. I think my biggest tips for parents when they have a child who is socially struggling is, I mean, one, I always connect with the teacher and kind of say, like, hey, so my kid seems to be struggling. We're not getting invited. We're not being included as much as we would like to. And that starts to happen.
Half the year's over and there's been no party invites. Like what's going on?
I would ask the teacher if they notice anybody that they tend to connect with a little bit more so than other peers, right? Because they are doing, I mean, teachers are doing, it's not like they're doing a science experiment, but it really is. Like they've got a little classroom. It's just this little kind of contained experiment of like, well, let's see what happens, right? So I always connect with teachers and ask them like their advice. They are observing a lot. The second thing is when, is I tell parents to provide some structure for social gatherings. And what that looks like at like the kinder first second is when they invite someone over for a play date. Like let's say your kid's not really getting invited over, but so you're like, oh well, I'm gonna do it.
Sure,
I'm gonna invite some kids over. If you invite some kids over, even if it's one-on-one or you invite a couple of friends and there's no structure to it, there's so much social pressure on that child for their friends to have fun.
Right?
Yeah, like, I mean, when I invite people over to my house, I kind of want them to have fun. Like I like entertaining.
Right.
It's fun.
For adults, you're thinking like, do they drink? Do they not? Are they vegan? Like, should we have music playing?
Yeah, you're doing all that. So what I recommend to parents is when your kid's struggling socially, like I would provide some structure. And that can look like going places for really young kids. It could just be going to the park. It can, for like, if you're talking like first, maybe second, third graders, if they're crafty and they like to craft, then go by Michael's and picking up some things for them to do together. Yeah. That lessens the social pressure and the like intensity of like trying to maintain that verbal conversation, that back and forth. That really can be hard for kids that are struggling socially. And after doing that a few times, once they have a few shared experiences with someone, then they have a little more confidence in their ability to, I mean, they probably talk with them about school. Like, oh, remember when we made that gingerbread house kid? And they're having a few more shared experiences, and that makes it easier for them to kind of interact socially and maybe interject themselves. Another thing when you're talking with the teacher is I would talk with the school about if you have someone that's really struggling, what are some ways that the school can help kind of promote some relationships, especially with younger kids. I mean, maybe they get to be the ones that take the notes to the office for a week and, okay, you guys are buddying up, or I mean, just giving them little responsibilities together.
In a pair.
And again, it's the shared experiences that doesn't require one kid making sure that the other kid is having a good time. Like it's kind of gives a little structure to it.
Well, I think that even as adults, we look at that. Like if people be like, oh, you're so outgoing. It's like, actually, I'm pretty shy. Like if I'm going to a conference where I don't know anybody, I'm a little nervous about that. But if I'm going to a conference where I don't know anybody, oh, and by the way, I'm manning this table, I have a service commitment.
Right.
It's a totally different experience. I'm super comfortable. I know my role. I've got something to do. Like there's a purpose for me to be there.
Yeah.
How often, if at all, do you find that there's fault is a rough word, but like that parents are maybe sometimes so concerned with their kids connecting with who they think the proper playmates are? I see you both shaking your head, so I know I'm going down the right road here. As opposed to like organically who their playmates might be, right? And even as adults, like I have friends who are like, well, I want to go hang out. Well, but all these people want to hang out with you, and you are kind of looking to trade up a little bit here. I mean, is there a point as a parent where you have to be like, listen, this is my kid's lot in life, and these are your peers. Like, so let's water that garden.
I literally just said this today. I was talking about how there's different like types of friend groups. I was talking to my client about this, and I shared this with her parents, that I was saying, you know the coat that you wear that's like so comfortable, and you can put a sweater under it, and no matter what, it's going to be really comfortable, but maybe it's not like your cutest coat. And then you have the coat that you wear that's like a little snug, and like if you're a little bloated, it's not going to look good on you, and you probably should need to wear like your thinnest sweater. And so I talk about when kids are choosing friends, right? Especially like in that 3rd, 4th, 5th grade range, where we know kids can be really cruel and they can be really mean. And I think there's what happens a lot of times is kids are trying to navigate like, where do I feel comfortable? And then where is maybe like a little bit outside of my comfort zone? And to me, I get parents wanting to sort of like socially engineer, right? Like maybe I'm friends with all of these parents, so I want my kid to be friends with all of these kids too. It makes my life easier. But at what cost, right? Are you putting your kid in that too tight coat that just doesn't feel comfortable? And to me, I think that even those ambivalent relationships where a child doesn't know where they stand, like maybe some days this group of friends is kind of nice to them, and then other days they're not really nice to them. That's going to make them so anxious. It makes me so anxious.
It's just the tightest sweater.
The tightest sweater. And like you get on the group text and you're like, do I say anything? Because I don't want them to I don't want to say something wrong.
Right.
And I feel that as an adult. And so I always share this with parents. I think that for us to be really transparent with our kids screams. Like it just gives them such a good thing to hold on to that we don't always have it all figured out. And so if you share with your daughter, right? Mom's going to go to a mom event, and there's going to be a lot of moms there, and I'm actually really nervous to go too, and I was really worried to go, so I actually called another mom that I feel really connected with, and we're driving together, right? So you're giving your kid ideas of things that might make you feel more comfortable and might help them too. But I think about that all the time, like the too tight sweater. And I want my kid to be in that comfy coat.
Well, and you brought up a group text, which I think is like the perfect segue to, this is like upcoming for us, but I'm sure is day in, day out for both of you. If I can assume what your work life is like, is like the cell phone. And I think the initial like question is, as kids start to get their devices, is one child feeling like, everyone has a cell phone but me, which isn't always the case. But if you're kind of one of the holdout families, which I suspect I will be, and so I'm like anticipating this, what do you do as the holdout family when then all the friends are on the group text and they're making plans and your child isn't included because they don't have a phone?
It's really hard. Okay, so there isn't really an easy answer to flip a light switch and make that a simple scenario because it's really, really hard. They do feel left out. I'm also of the mindset of not giving them their phones really early. I don't think that there's...
What's really early?
I was going to say, as professionals, what's the number?
I'm on the wait till 8th thing. Are you guys aware of that? That's like a group pact that a bunch of us moms have made.
Too early still? What do you think?
My 21-year-old got one late. I think it was late 7th grade, and he did a lot of basketball tournaments, and so we were leaving him with other people.
Totally,
it was not child abandonment, but So we needed him to be able to say, "Hey, we lost this game or we won this game." So he had one a little earlier. My daughter got one in 8th grade.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'll let you finish because I interrupted with the what grade is. So the challenge getting through, like the question is like talking directly about like, what do you do when your kid's being left out of group text? Because he or she doesn't have the phone.
And the reality is it's going to happen. Like and it's sad and it's heartbreaking, but probably I know my children have both experienced that. And the likelihood is that your children will also be left out because it's such a public setting. I've had clients that they're like, I made a comment on the group text and no one liked it. And then they just like maybe an hour or two later, someone said something else. Like no one commented on like, hey, do you like my new sweater? Or do you like,
I feel that as an adult.
Me too.
And so
like when you say, hey, does anybody want to do a play date? And it's like crickets. And you're like, oh,
maybe they didn't see it.
Yeah.
Did it go through?
Yeah.
So my advice on that is really, okay, so I think you talk to your kids really openly about like setting expectations and knowing like, so this happens to me. You said it happened to me too.
Yes.
So this is going to happen. You're going to feel left out. They can see where if they have Snapchat, they can see where like the location stuff is. I dial that.
People are heading out or hanging out together and they're not invited.
I'm pretty particular about that. I really dial back permissions on that, especially when they're younger getting their phone. But I think you have to set expectations and let them, this is going to happen. And I want to have a really pretty open dialogue about how to respond. Like I want my kids to come to me and say like, hey, I don't even know how to respond to this, or they're completely leaving me out. You can't, if they're in 7th or 8th grade, you can't really interject at that point and make this group of 7th or 8th grade kids include them. Mm-hmm. So then how do you find other ways for them to feel accepted and included in other areas of their life?
Buy them a car.
Well, so if you
private jet,
a private jet is perfect. That solves all problems,
really
right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can completely protect them. But then I would then lean back on this is real. It's really hard. You can't completely solve that. I mean, are there going to be scenarios where you're like friends with a parent, and maybe if there is like some bullying going on or some really kind of mean behavior, then you might be able to like reach out to that parent and be like, hey, just FYI, this is going on the group text. And imagine.
Just heads up, right?
Yeah, heads up.
Sure.
So you might be able to kind of come in from that perspective, but there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to be like, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And you know what? It makes me sad and mad. And I don't ever want you to feel left out, but you do right now. And I'm sorry and I love you, right? And then how do you then help fill up other areas in their life where they do feel included and feel capable? When we talk about like, especially as they get into teens, where they need to have like these different buckets. And these buckets, you can't put everything in, the old adage, you can't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So having some different areas that are fulfilling and they feel
empowered,
good.
right?
Yeah, it's so important because you can't protect them from it. That's
I know. I bet that's going to be hard though, because you've got a kid who's like, I feel so left out, and you can solve this if you would just get me a phone and I won't be such a loser.
Yeah.
And you're like, sorry, you're not getting a phone. Like, okay. So I wish we had a ton more time, but I do want to touch on this really quick. So listen, we're dealing with kids that are feeling apart from, that are feeling different than. What do you say to the parent that says, listen, my kid is already anxious. They're already feeling less than, different than, Now we're going to add going to talk to a professional on top of that. Mm-hmm. Like, won't that only add to the stigma and anxiety?
Good question.
So how do you navigate that as a parent?
That is such a good question. So we talk about this all the time, where the parents will say like, what do I call you?
Right,
what do I tell them they're doing? And so when we work with little kids, we do play therapy. So we can say, from 3 to 10, we can say, you're going to go play with Miss Ahu, right? And so, and to them, they see a room full of toys, and maybe sometimes they're like, I don't know why I come here every week. And you can talk to them about, this is a place for you to go. It supports you with your emotions, right? Like there's like developmentally appropriate ways to say that. When kids get older, even in like the 8, 9, 10, 11 range, right? Kids will surprise you. So I had a parent ask me recently, like, well, should we bring him in? I said, did you ask him? Like, he's 12. What did you ask him what he thinks? And they were like, we hadn't thought of that. And I said, well, you can ask him. They were like, okay. And a lot of times, again, kids will really surprise you. I had like a 10-year-old boy who was like, yes, I would love to go. I would love to be there. Because to them, it feels like, I do think, even from like my generation to this one, I think it really has, mental health is so much more talked about. I think it really is destigmatized. Like I think kids feel...
Yeah, a lot of their parents probably already go to somebody and are super open about it.
Exactly. And so I think for them, it just feels like a part of life a lot of times. Mm-hmm. So to them, especially if they know like I am hurting, when we have kids who are incredibly anxious or really are feeling overwhelmed with their emotions, to them it's like, great, give me a solution. Like I don't want to feel this way anymore.
Well, to your point, that play therapy becomes a bucket that is full of empowerment and like, I'm in control and I'm enjoying this experience and so on and so forth. Okay. And real quick, how do I know whether or not my kid is just kind of a quick to cry and a little zzz about stuff, or like, hey, like we really have something to sit down and talk to somebody about.
Little sudden diagnosis.
Go ahead, Christina.
I was just going to say there's two things that I think that are important to consider when we're saying like, okay, so when is like therapy and intervention that should be used? And so I talk with clients and like my clients' parents about the duration and intensity of symptoms. So, how long has it been going on? Because we all know that kids go through development, and sometimes, sometimes they're
It's
like,
over in 6
they're having
months.
like, you're like, oh my gosh, they've been crying about everything. And then all of a sudden, you know,
They're not.
3 or 4 weeks later, they're like, oh, it's past. Or they wouldn't go into school, like separation anxiety. And then it resolved after a few weeks. Like that's not, I mean, therapy doesn't need to be used at that point. But if something's been going on for an extended period of time and is really like the symptoms are intense, it's really disruptive. So if disruptive to daily life, like school refusal is a good example that we see sometimes. And so if you've got a 4 or 5-year-old and they're all of a sudden, maybe something happened, maybe they're kind of connecting to like maybe they fell and hurt themselves and they had a rough day, but it kind of resolved over a few weeks and things improved. Fine. But if over 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks and they're still kind of having a really, really significant issues, then I would say, oh, I might seek some support just to help see what is going on a little bit more. I mean, just be more curious about what's really going on. Is there something else that we need to do? So when it comes to like, oh, well, when do we take our kid to see a therapist? I mean, if a kid is saying, hey, I want to go talk to someone, I tend to say
yes.
Probably so.
Yeah,
and that's
prioritize that.
Even if there's nothing clinically really significant going on, them just saying, hey, my feelings feel a little bit too much right now and I want to be able to process it with someone else, just allowing them the space, even if it's like 3 or 4 sessions, just to build a relationship is really, really valuable. But then if the kid, if the child isn't old enough to really ask for it, or if they're not asking for it, I would say, well, how disruptive is the symptom in your life, in his life or her life? How impactful? Is this impacting their ability to do life the way you want them to do it and the way they want to do it? And if it is impacting it in that way, and it's been going on for longer than you would like, and obviously longer than 2 weeks, then I would say, I mean, call a therapist. And sometimes we get calls and we're like, oh, I mean, they don't necessarily need services. I would read this book, or I would try this and reach out to me, reach back out if things haven't resolved. I mean, like we do that all the time. And then sometimes there's also people that are like, hey, this is going on. We're like, hey, let's schedule an intake, right? So it's not always like, it's not necessarily very black and white. There's a lot of gray in there.
As is always the case in life. Ladies, thank you so much. This was wonderful. We could really grill you for another hour here. But for people who do want to inquire and find out, how can they get in touch and potentially book?
Oh, well, I mean, Ahu is the master, threadcounseling.com. She's the one that really is the one that built or helped with the website.
So that's the website.
Threadcounseling.com. You can follow us on Instagram at threadcounseling.
Oh, great. So I can follow along. What a better parent you are than I am.
No, remember, she forced
if I see one Christmas cookie, I swear.
You will not. I will show you my daughter's horrible dress.
I want to see messy hair, no bow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
I mean,
okay, Steve.
Well, listen, and I'm not a big reader, but I feel like everybody's reading The Anxious Generation right now. And I don't know if that's actually a book I should be reading or if everyone's just reading it.
My mom read it on
has
my
become
behalf.
this like de facto. and
I outsourced it.
Well, maybe she can give me a summary.
She'll give you the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, but like, again, like, it's like, okay, what are we talking here? Like, is it like, I look back at Jacob, for example, which, by the way, I was thinking about this today. Like, do you ever, and I don't even think about this when we're doing our show, but like sometimes when it's over, like,
think about them listening to it later.
Correct.
Yes.
In 20 years.
We can delete them. We can selectively delete.
Like, how
just
does that
kidding. They're out there.
happen?
We can't.
Right,
We can't. No, I've definitely thought that.
funny?
And with
Especially
TV, it's so fun to have, because all the moments that we celebrate on TV, like their births or, you know, those are all fun.
Right.
They'll be like so proud, like, wow, this is cool. My parent worked in TV and so I got to be on TV that time for my birthday. This is like.
Right. Like, could you imagine having like a video chronicle of like your grandparents
I
and
try
all
to
these?
not give too many specific details on them, but only positive. I mean, we've given positive details about the kids.
I mean,
mostly.
You know, well, and again, like what does that look like? So like, is that like a daily manifestation, or is it like, you know, like, again, like, hey, you got like, he had a yo-yo that broke from that friggin' arcade. We got like a 10
I told you I hated
yo-yo.
that arcade from the beginning. I never supported his gambling at that arcade.
Well, so here's the thing. So it broke. And he said, it broke, whatever. And I said, okay, buddy, I told you it was kind of a piece of garbage, like whatever. By the way, he didn't tell me how it broke. It was just a string situation that I was able to fix. But he said, you know, he said to me, he goes, but I have enough tickets if we go back. I still have 27 tickets left over and it was only 10. So can we get a new one? And I was like, we can't.
Oh, why?
We can't. Because I told you like that we're getting it. It's not of the quality that you think it's going to be. And if it breaks,
You
that's
stuck
it.
to it.
Like, that's
Good job.
it. Like, I'm not giving in to,
Well, you're not,
because I'm a
giving
dad.
in
I'm a bad
like-
dad.
I'm not giving in like I gave in when I went trick-or-treating by myself to that house to get the sword that broke.
Oh gosh, which is a great segue into listening to past episodes. You can find
my
us on your favorite
gosh.
podcast platform. As always, click like and subscribe and join us for a new episode every Tuesday morning. And if you do nothing else today, go find yourself a friend you don't need to clean the house for. It makes for a less anxious friendship, right?
I agree.
I'll see you next time.